we'll be hot, sweaty, and drinking terrible margaritas tonight.
It's the American dream. Welcome to A Christian and an Atheist Walk into a Bar. As always, is with me, Ty. Jesus was the original anchor baby Gallenbeck. And I am your other host, Jay. The only thing more imaginary than God is a border. Stooksbury.
Yes.
And if you couldn't tell by our intro, we're going to talk about immigration. We actually had another topic lined up. And we decided that it was such a what's going on right now in the news, very, very topical, that we would switch to this since it's actually in the now right now.
Exactly. Yeah, we actually had beers at a softball game, and we're like, we should mix it up a little. And so we are not drinking beer. We're not drinking whiskey. Tonight, we are drinking tequila.
It seemed appropriate.
That's right. In the form of a squirt margarita.
You might want to explain that one a little bit more.
That could be true.
That could be easily misinterpreted.
That's right. So I've actually seen this done. I have a good friend named Sarah who this is what she does for her margaritas, tequila, and then just pours the soda squirt on top of it, and that's it. That's what they do.
And I told Ty before, like right before we started recording, that this is the best margarita I've had all day.
That's right. Would not say this is going to be my new favorite, but
it'll work.
It didn't have lime, so we're navigating with it as is.
Yeah, we just we're being resilient and we're being resourceful, and here we are. And it's not bad.
It's not bad.
It'll work.
It's cold, It's got some alcohol in it. It'll be good.
Yeah.
So,
and it's been actually a little while since we recorded last too. So, did you want to talk a little bit about what's been going on with you? And
yeah, we had a little delay. Life happened, to say the least. My wife's father actually passed away unexpectedly. And kind of threw everything for a loop.
Sorry about your loss too.
Yeah, and the way that can only disrupt life, I think. Yeah. And so, I took a couple of weeks off to be with family and kind of deal with all of that stuff. And it's going to be a long process for sure. But here we are, and it was. This is going to sound really weird, but I actually went back and listened to the Why Do Bad Things Happen episode after we did that. Yeah, just because I was like, okay, I'm in the middle of this situation. Like, Did anything we say actually make sense? I was like, yeah, I would still agree with it. So
that's good.
Yeah, So here we are. We're back. And we're actually going to bring a guest in.
Yeah, I'm excited about this.
Here in just a few minutes. I'm going to give him a few minutes before we call in. But it's a friend I went to high school with. Nope, not high school, college with. And she has been super active and involved in immigration, and she works in Southern California in a largely Hispanic community, and so she has seen and dealt with this stuff firsthand in ways that I'm not even sure to the extent. So we're going to let her chime in and kind of share a little bit of how she's involved with that, but I figured at least to start, we should, lay some groundwork about what's going on, thoughts from both of our sides, what you see, what you hear, those kind of things. So you want to start with a little 10,000 foot?
So, I think this is obviously a very emotional topic. I very rarely see a grounded conversation in this, and it's I would argue probably one of the most divisive conversations right now too. It's what I like to call a wedge issue, where it comes up particularly during election years, and it really roots both sides of the debate with whatever their partisan identity is, And right now, the big issue that's come up is a uh, a very increased effort to um, stop immigration at our southern border, and not only that, but also through a lot of enhanced activity throughout the country through the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency in deporting immigrants. And I think it was kind of the centerpiece of the Trump campaign. I think he made it really big that build the wall was a really big part of his narrative.
Right.
And I think a lot of people obviously responded to that as well. But as a result, and I'll get into the politics of it too, kind of throughout this conversation, because it's been something that's been brewing for a long time. It's not just Trump. It's not just Republicans. It's been an issue that we've kicked the can down the road for far too long.
Right.
And I think it's really come to head this week because of attention being brought to how families are being separated at the border. So if a family's caught trying to seek asylum, which is usually a common tactic to gain entry into the country, children as young as babies, basically,
Right.
are being taken away from their families and put into makeshift detention centers. Some of them are like revamped Walmarts, and basically just locked away from their parents without any sort of idea of when they'll be able to see them again, because a lot of the due process protections don't apply to them. And I think it's a pretty emotional conversation right now, just based off of the imagery that's coming out of seeing these kids who are parentless and crying and alone, and they have no idea what's going on, and language barriers. And there's also a no-touch policy that agents can't coddle these kids who are in need of some sort of emotional support. So it's a traumatic experience for these kids, and it shakes me to my core. I mean, it's something I think should affect everybody's consciousness, but as a parent, it just, as I've always said, anything that happens with kids just floors me, you know? So, I think that's kind of where we're at right now. And it's turned into a little bit of a political theater used as leverage,
Right.
Okay, let's figure this out. Are you going to pay for my wall now, and it can go both ways. Democrats have their own talking points that they're leveraging too, and it's really frustrating that to see this issue get to almost a really inhumane level, in my personal opinion.
I would agree completely. And then you throw stuff in too, like Jeff Sessions quoting the Bible to support this, essentially. And not only now has he divided politically Republicans and Democrats, now there's this division you're seeing roll through the church on who, which side of that do you fall on? Like, are you agreeing with the statement, or do you see it differently? And so that creates a whole nother level of tension and strife in this country.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point I didn't even think about beforehand. There's a lot of churches right now who are in the middle of this whole conversation about sanctuary cities, where churches are actually providing shelter and providing support for a lot of undocumented people, and it's butting up against more conservative congregations too that are not necessarily accepting of that too.
Right. And Bethany, that we're going to jump on the phone with here, is going to have so much insight on all of these. I'm super excited to kind of get her on the phone and hear. I mean, we are in a lot of ways. I mean, Jay and I talked earlier that we both have experience dealing with illegal immigrants in Boys and Girls Club situations or other places where we've kind of seen how the system makes their life incredibly difficult. But we've seen success stories. We've seen incredible kids come, turn into huge contributing members of our society. But Bethany is like in the heart of it, dealing with it on a daily basis. So I think it's going to be fun to kind of hear what she has to say. So let's see if we can make this work. This is our first phone-in interview, so we're going to see.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Hello, Bethany.
Yes.
Hey.
Yes, hi, Jay.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you guys?
Great. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this was literally thought of this like today that I should give you a call because I know how active you are in this immigration reform and just everything going on with this. And so thank you so much for joining us on kind of short notice.
Of course.
And so to start, are you drinking anything right now?
Well, I'm actually in my office, which is at a church, so I can't be drinking something. But if I were, I would be drinking a Moscow Mule, probably.
There you go.
So I'm just going to pretend.
That's fair.
It's a podcast. People have no idea.
Yeah, so I'm totally drinking.
Yeah. There you go. So we decided, just so you catch up with our listeners, because we laid a little groundwork before we called you, but we made margaritas using squirt soda because I didn't have any limes. So we thought that was, fitting.
Yeah,
given the situation. So let's start. Give us just some background on who you are, what you've done, because I don't think I could begin to list all of the different things I've seen you be involved with along this line. So,
yeah, well, I work for a nonprofit organization in Orange County, California, called Solidarity. I've been working with them for about 12, 13 years. And traditionally, Solidarity is a community development organization. Our work is to strengthen urban communities. And we do that through a number of community programs, after-school programs, teen centers, mentoring programs. But the communities that we serve in are primarily immigrant communities. And so when I got involved years ago in the neighborhood that I still live in with my husband and kids, the number one issue, after building relationships and just kind of hearing people's stories and sharing life with people, it was clear that the number one issue was immigration and was people's immigration status. From very young children to very old people, it was the number one issue that every family in our neighborhood dealt with. And so because of that, we're a Christian organization. We kind of made a commitment to, if this is a burden that our neighbors are carrying, then it's something that we need to be engaged in as well. So I kind of, just because of personal connection and relationships that I had and just a passion that I feel like I got from the Lord, I kind of led the charge for our organization to become educated on what our immigration system actually is. Why are people undocumented? Why don't they just go get in line and fill out paper? That they, to get legal, that those are questions that we asked in the beginning and kind of sought out answers. And then obviously, as a Christian organization, we looked at Scripture. What does the Bible have to say about this? What is our call as people that are committed to following the way of Jesus? What's our call to engage this issue that it didn't used to be controversial, then it was really controversial, then it kind of was like we were making some headway on it, and then now it's extremely controversial. So I've kind of seen it through the gamut over the last decade or so, like how kind of society has engaged it. But for us, it's always been grounded in Scripture, grounded in relationships, and grounded in facts. So as we've kind of went on that journey, I decided that I wanted to open up a immigration legal clinic through something that our government allows nonprofits to do. It's called Department of Justice Recognition and Accreditation. You can Google that if you're interested. But basically, it means that as a nonprofit, we can went through a number of things that we had to do, kind of hoops to jump through, but we were approved by the government to be an agency that can practice immigration law as a service to the community. So I run that for Solidarity. It's called Communal Immigration Services. So I practice immigration law as what's called a DOJ accredited rep. We have an immigration attorney on our staff as well and some support staff. So my day-to-day job is literally knowing the law, updating myself on policy changes and advising clients on what their opportunities are as far as, adjusting their status, either from undocumented to a green card holder, or from a temporary status to a permanent resident, or to become a citizen. So that's what I do. But I also am very involved in, and have been for years, in the advocacy aspect of it, and really helping to mobilize the church to understand why we should care about immigrants, and what our laws actually are, and what our opportunity as citizens in this country and as Christians to advocate for better laws. And so I've been really active in that. I worked for a time with the Evangelical Immigration Table as a church mobilizer, and helped to mobilize churches in California around immigration. I've spent a lot of time in DC advocating, working with legislators. I'm trying to get some better policy in place. And I help to lead a network in Orange County of evangelical leaders that are really committed to serving and walking with the immigrant population, but also with discipling the church in a deeper understanding of God's heart for the immigrant.
So to summarize, you're like the perfect guest on this topic for us.
Well, there are a lot of people that are a lot smarter than me, but I will humbly admit that I probably know more than the average person about this issue. So if that helps, then great.
Yeah. Well, that's great.
So before we jump in and get too serious, I want to hear one story, because I know you got arrested fairly recently.
Yes.
So can you tell that story?
Or is it still pending?
I've been arrested twice.
Okay.
But they were both really kind of powerful experiences for me. But probably the one that got a lot more press was with a group of evangelical leaders. A lot of people know who Shane Claiborne was. He was in the group of us that participated in the act of civil disobedience that led to our arrest. It was around DACA and the DREAM Act. So DACA is a policy, an administrative policy under the Obama administration that allowed specific young people that met a list of qualifications to have to defer their deportation and to receive a work permit for 2 years at a time. And that was canceled by the Trump administration September of last year. And so in a kind of a call to Congress to make that decision right and to pass a permanent legislation, a permanent protection for what's known as dreamers or undocumented youth or DACA recipients. We actually, for a month or so, we were gathering prayers and dreams of people in the community, and we delivered those to Paul Ryan. We knocked on his door. He didn't answer. So we proceeded to pray and read and share the dreams that we had collected from across the country in the halls of Congress, and as a result, were arrested and spent a couple hours in jail with some of my heroes and some of my closest friends. And so it was very powerful and emotional experience for me, just carrying the weight of my community, my neighbors, people in my family that have DACA, and just kind of carrying their hopes and dreams and my hopes and dreams for them as a part of, my family and community to the halls of Congress and to where the decisions are made that impact our lives. And it was like a holy moment. It was right before Christmas, and we sang Silent Night as we were arrested, just as a kind of an ode to, Jesus the refugee, Jesus the immigrant. And it was an experience.
Wow.
That's cool.
Wow. Hats off to you for that.
Thanks. Yeah. It was an honor to be a part of it.
So I think where I would like to jump in to start, because you say you are not the most knowledgeable on this, but I know you are light years ahead of myself. So you said one of the things that you are most concerned with is facts. And I think there are a lot of times where there is some very misrepresented, quote unquote, facts. And so I think Jay and I, if you're good with it, Jay and I will ask you a few questions about maybe, misconceptions or things that we've heard, and try to give maybe your best representation to kind of just lay a foundation for, okay, here, regardless of your viewpoint, here is kind of the nuts and bolts of this situation. That sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Perfect.
So I guess one of the most common, and I think just because of the way that the political narrative is right now and the way Trump really framed this issue, is that he's connected immigration to being a law and order issue, and a lot of the characterization of immigrants have been primarily that of a criminal nature, And I think I've done my own research on this, but I'd be interested on your own perspective on the notion that immigration or immigrants in general, whether legal or illegal, contribute to a higher crime rate.
Yeah, I mean, the facts are, if you've done research, then I'm sure you've seen that, all stats kind of point to the reality that that actually immigrants are less likely, undocumented or documented, immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens. That's just across the board. You can get those stats from the government. Border, cities among our southern border they have lower crime rates typically than what the national average is. As immigration, undocumented immigrants rise, the number has risen in our country over the last, stats show over the last decade or so. Not that it actually hasn't continued to rise, but as the presence of undocumented immigrants, the number went up, crime went down. So the notion that somehow this is majority criminals coming in, that the presence of immigrants, legal or illegal, somehow makes our country less safe is just simply not true. And oftentimes this is where kind of understanding the data that you're looking at comes into play. Oftentimes people will show me stats from federal crimes, and they'll say, look, 33% of these crimes, these federal charges are immigrants. Well, most crime, the crime that you and I think of, robbery, murder, assault, rape, those are typically, vast majority are taken care of at the state level, or if they're less crimes, at the local level.
Right.
They're not accounted for when looking at federal crimes. So you can't look at federal crime and think that you have a picture of what is actually happening when it comes to crimes. Federal violations include immigration violations. So it makes sense that when you're looking at federal crime or federal convictions, that a majority or a large percentage of those are going to be immigrants, because only immigrants can violate immigration laws, which are federal laws. So a lot of times, if you don't understand the data that you're looking at, or certain news media will put out, only one portion of a study and say, look, immigrants are criminals, 33% of crime is committed by immigrants. Well, no, that's actually not true at all. Most crime, is immigrants are less likely to commit crime than U.S. citizens. That's just across the board. So I think that understanding, facts are not typically something that's debatable, but we're in this season in our country where they are, because we pick and choose what facts, quote unquote, we like to
fake news
use to make our point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good segue to my next question too. A lot of the conversation about the crimes that are being committed, and kind of the justification, especially right now what's happening with separating families, I've always hear this equivalency of, well, if a dad went and murdered somebody, you'd want his kids pulled away from him, right? You'd want that family separated, right? But you can't put violating immigration law and murder into the same categories, correct?
No, you can't. And
Right.
I think this is also really important for people to understand, is up until this administration, entering this country illegally was a civil violation. It was the legal equivalent of speeding on the highway.
Right.
That is what our laws say. What happened pretty quickly after Trump became president is that Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, put out a memo that said, basically, the administration is defining anybody who has violated any immigration crime, any immigration law at any time as a criminal. So this is not a memo that got a lot of news coverage. This is not something that, everyday citizens are reading memos coming from Jeff Sessions. This is something that I read because it affects, my work. I try to stay on top of what policies are coming out of DC in this administration. And so I saw the memo, I read the memo, and many people in my field of work saw it too. And so what's happening is that when you hear people in the administration say that they're targeting criminals, they're telling the truth in the sense that they have redefined criminal to mean any human being that has ever violated an immigration law. So that can mean a 20-year-old who was brought into this country as a 2-year-old and is now and has been and continues to be undocumented. They are classifying that person, because they are in violation of immigration policy by being here undocumented, as a criminal. So to start, the language that the administration is using, they're redefining terms and shifting kind of how we have legally and as policy have seen and treated immigrants. So that's really important for the population to know that when Trump says, we're only going after criminals. Mm-hmm. Well, the way they're defining criminals is different than how the rest of us typically would define a criminal.
Right.
Got it.
And the notion of separating a family for, going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit is, I think, probably a better equivalency than actual crime.
Right.
Exactly. And when we put people in jail for crimes that they've committed, we don't typically take their children and put them in a detention facility.
Right.
That's just not what we do. And in the way the administration is creating the problem of having, all of these children without parents, because they've decided, as of April, they've enacted a zero tolerance policy that says they're going to be putting criminal charges against anybody that they believe entered the country illegally. Mm-hmm. So that's not something that has been done in at least in the last decade or so. That's not what our law requires to happen. That's a policy from the administration.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I've heard, and when I worked for Boys and Girls Club, my primary location was probably 80 to 90% Hispanic students. And I heard multiple times from different people, well, why don't you just go get a green card, like get legal? It's not hard. Like, Why don't you just get that taken care of? What does that process actually look like?
How long is your podcast? We could be here a while now. I'll give you the shortest version possible of that. Okay, so our current immigration law basically falls into 3 categories. Okay, so it's labor, it's family, and it's humanitarian. Okay, so those are the three kind of umbrellas of ways to migrate here legally. So labor is high-skill workers and low-skill workers is how we kind of split it up. And then there's some other exceptional categories for exceptional people. But primarily it's high-skilled laborers, which are going to be tech industry, doctors, nurses, that kind of field. Low skill is going to be farm workers, people working in the hospitality industry. So let me just give you a glimpse of how that works. So we have quotas. So we allow for 5,000 low-skill worker visas a year to be given out. Our economy absorbs 500,000 low-skill workers, foreign-born low-skill workers a year.
So
what we're allowing to happen legally versus what our economy depends on and what we're allowing to happen illegally is in great contradiction. So that's just labor. So then you look at family.
Hold on.
And family.
So I just want to make sure so that I understand this and our listeners understand this. You're saying we can allow 5,000 immigrants in the entire U.S. in a year,
yes.
Correct?
Specific with visas
for low skill
labor.
I can almost guarantee you we employ more than 5,000 people in Delta County in that category. So, okay. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah. Okay, family.
Yeah. So family is broken up into categories, and it's based on relationships. So there's an immediate relative of U.S. citizen, and that is a spouse, a parent, or a child that is under. You can be over. It gets really confusing. Okay, so immediate relative of a U.S. citizen. That means that if you're a U.S. citizen and you're over the age of 21, you can petition your parents. If you're a U.S. citizen and you can petition your spouse, and you can petition your parents. Okay, so those are the categories that a U.S. citizen can petition. Then there are other categories. So green card holders, which is a legal permanent resident. They can petition their spouses or their children. U.S. citizens can also petition their brothers or sisters, but that's not considered an immediate relative. So for an immediate relative, the three that I mentioned first, those you can apply for immediately, and you'll wait just the processing time, which is 9 months to a year typically. Any other category, and if anybody is interested in this, you can just Google it's called a visa bulletin, and it's updated every month, and you can see the different categories, how they're defined, and you can see the wait times. So right now, for example, we're processing applications for U.S. citizens that petitioned their siblings. We're processing those applications that were filed in 1995.
Wow.
So we have a backlog of 23 years. It's anywhere from 3 years is the shortest to 23 years. So, that is why people don't get in line, because the line is long. Now, There's also another kind of caveat to that, which is a 10-year bar. So anybody that has unlawful presence for more than a year in the United States, they are required. So I'll give you an example to make this understandable. And this is a very common case that comes into my office. So a new married couple. One is undocumented and one is a U.S. citizen. And they're like, okay, we just got married. We're so in love. The U.S. citizen spouse wants to petition the undocumented spouse. My first question is, how did you enter this country? And typically that person will say, not always, because about 40 to 50% of undocumented immigrants actually entered with a visa. But typically that person will say, I was a kid. My mom carried me across the border. I was a baby. I don't know. I think I got drove through. I'm not sure. Okay, so you what's called entered without inspection. So how long have you been, in the United States? If you're 20, then you've been here for 18 years. And the last 2 of those years, you were an adult. And so you started to accrue unlawful presence. You've been here you have more than a year of unlawful presence. So even though you have an immediate visa available to you through an immediate relative U.S. citizen, you have to return to your country to go through the process. When you leave the country, you trigger a 10-year bar, and you have to wait outside the country for 10 years before you can receive the visa that is available, or the green card that's immediately available to you through your U.S. citizen spouse. So what do most people do in that situation? They don't say, okay, yeah, I'm going to go back to my country and wait 10 years. A lot of these people already have children that are U.S. citizens here in this country, and they're not going to be gone from their kids for 10 years while they wait out that bar. This happens also very commonly with, older parents whose children are finally turning 21, and they're so excited because now their 21-year-old can petition them. Well, it's the same thing. Did you enter without a visa? Do you have unlawful presence? Yes. Okay, then you have to return to your home country, and you will trigger a 10-year bar. So the idea of we'll just get in line, for the vast majority of people that are undocumented, there is either no line to get in or a line that includes a bar. of usually 10 years.
Right.
So that's why.
So it's not
there's
as easy
no
as
easy
people
answer to that
think.
question. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The reason that DACA was created was because for that population specifically, there is virtually no way for them to change their status without triggering a 10-year bar.
Right. So there's, like you said, there's sometimes no line for them to stand in, but it also just sounds like there's a actual stronger incentive to go the illegal route.
Yeah, to stay undocumented,
right.
Because that means you get to stay with your family.
One of my favorite arguments that I always end up in with a lot of conservative folks is they always say we're not talking about legal immigration. Our primary concern is illegal immigration. And my favorite thing to say to them is, mine too. Let's legalize more of it. And that's usually when they become a little red in the face, and the conversation usually comes to an abrupt stop.
Yeah. So before I'll talk a little bit about the humanitarian, the third one, but kind of what I advocate for is, in very layman's terms, is to make it harder to come here illegally, to make it easier to come here legally, and to create a path to legal status and citizenship for the 11 million people that are here already. I mean, that's like the kind of layman's terms of what we advocate for when we're asking for comprehensive immigration reform. That includes border security, although our borders are more secure than they've ever been. And there's been a lot of money even under the last administration, that's been pumped into border security. I spend a lot of time on the border, actually, and see firsthand the technology. I do border tours with Border Patrol agents, and it's very secure. But we have to make it easier for people to come here legally. And right now it's nearly impossible. And so when you're talking about people that are outside of the country, like, for example, all these people coming to our borders, literally the only option for them is asylum. There's no other line for them to get in. Asylum is the only line for them to get in. So that asylum would be under like the humanitarian umbrella. So we have asylum, we have refugees, although our government has pretty much shut down the refugee program. We have visas that are available to people that are victims of crime and helps law enforcement in the investigation of that crime. We have visas that are for victims of people that are trafficked. But some of those visas, specifically the U visa, there's a quota. They only allow a certain amount every year, and they're currently backlogged like 5 to 6 years of processing those applications. So we do have some heart, in our immigration system, but it is very, very narrow and very specific, and can be, it's very specific. So the majority of people don't qualify. So back to the people at the border, these people don't have family members that can petition them. They don't have an immediate U.S. citizen relative. They may have a brother or sister, but the wait time for that is 20 years. So they have no other line to get in. Asylum is their only line. It's the only option for them, and that's what the majority of these folks coming from Central America are asking for. They're asking to be considered for asylum.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because really that's what has been kind of the focus on this particular issue in these past few weeks has been asylum seekers. So how has the process of seeking asylum changed under the Trump administration versus previous administrations?
Yes, so it kind of goes back to the memo that I talked about that came out right after Trump became president, that reclassified immigrants as criminals, and then it also kind of went the next step with the zero tolerance policy that was enacted in April by the Trump administration. And so this is where it gets really gray. So I'm going to be completely honest, because I've seen kind of conflicting stories on this, and I think it's really hard to tell. But from people that I trust and know, what I have heard is that people that are presenting themselves at the border, so they're not trying to sneak in, they're coming to ports of entry and they're asking Border Patrol to be considered for asylum, that even those people are being detained and separated from their children.
Right.
So they've literally done nothing illegal. That's not, it's a legal right to show up at a port of entry and ask for asylum. There's nothing illegal about that. You can argue if you think that should be illegal, that's fine. But as of now, it's not illegal. But they are being criminalized for that action, which is not a criminal act. And also families that are being detained in the process of trying to cross over the border. So that's where it's like a little gray, because we don't know really like how many are showing up at ports of entry versus how many are being apprehended in the desert trying to cross the border illegally. That's a very like, I think it's too soon to kind of really sort that out and know, what's going on with that. But from what I've heard, it's both. So that to me is really problematic, because we're literally, doing something that I would question the legality of criminalizing someone that's not breaking any law whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that most of the people that are showing up on our border, they're probably not going to win their asylum cases, because asylum is very hard and very narrow. It's a very narrow line and a very hard thing to win. We do asylum cases in my office, and we really pick and choose the cases that we take, because we know how, the odds are not in our favor. And it's all discretionary. So it really depends on the judge. So you can look at different parts of the country, and if they lean more conservative or more liberal, and the percentage of approvals, it fluctuates based on the political affiliation of the judges in those areas. So it's super discretionary. And so you can have the exact same case, and it be tried here in LA versus in the South, and the exact same facts, the exact same case, and it would get decided completely different. So that's kind of, an issue with asylum to begin with. I say that most of these people will not win their asylum cases, but that does not mean that they don't have credible fear, that they don't have legitimate fear of returning to their home country. The places in Central America that people are coming from, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, they're literally ravaged by gangs, by corrupt government. It's not a safe place to live. I have the clients in my office with the pictures and the news articles and the evidence from their own oppression that they experience in their home country. It's not a safe place. The problem is that our government, what we allow for asylum, it's very specific, a specific type of oppression, based on one of 5 categories. So that being your race, your nationality, your religion, your political affiliation, or your association in a specific social group. So if you can't prove that you have been oppressed or are likely to be oppressed because of one of those groups, then, one of those categories, then you don't qualify for asylum. So if you're terrified that the gangs are going to come and kidnap your child and murder you, which is a very common occurrence in Central America, you don't qualify for asylum. And that's something that, that Sessions just reiterated. He said that domestic violence and gang violence are no longer going to be considered as a specific social group that would qualify you for asylum. So although they do live in fear and their situations are dire and desperate and extremely dangerous, even with that, they probably will not qualify for asylum in our country. A lot of them.
I'm actually really glad you brought up Jeff Sessions too, because
good old Sessions.
So yeah, he's special, isn't he? He's my favorite Keebler elf in this administration, but not so much. Anyway, so and I want you to take off your lawyer hat for a second. Okay. And put on your worshiper hat.
Yes.
Whatever that may look like. And I want you to give your opinion or comments on Jeff Sessions' claim that following immigration law is biblical. It's in accordance with Romans 13.
Okay. Well, First of all, the policy of separating children from their parents at the border is not law. So, number one, that's not a law. That's a policy under this administration.
Right.
Number two, I think that scripture, which I have spent a lot of time studying, and I actually use it when I do presentations on immigration at churches and with the general public, what that scripture says is that we are to submit to the governing authorities. It doesn't say obey, and it doesn't say enforce. Okay, so when Sessions used it, I believe he said the word obey. When Sarah Sanders used it, the press secretary, she said enforce. Those are not correct translations or words to use in correlation with that Bible verse, first of all. So submit, what does that mean? Well, to me, what that means, and what many people a lot smarter than me think that means, and based on, translation, that means, like, for example, I submitted to the governing authorities when I did an act of civil disobedience, but I submitted because I took the punishment. So put me in jail. Cool. But I'm still gonna, use my right as a citizen of this country to voice my opinion and do what I feel is right. But I will submit to the authorities, and I will take the punishment for that if they believe it's in disagreement with what is legal. So I think that's one way to look at it. Now, we live in a democracy. We are blessed to live in a democracy, and so what that actually means is that we are the governing authorities. The people that are in power, they are elected to represent us. They're technically not leaders, although we treat them that way and they act that way. But we are the leaders of this country. That is the way our system is set up. We are the ones that we put people in DC or in the Capitol or in our local government to represent us as the leaders of this country.
And to serve us, really.
So instead of worrying about submitting to the governing authorities, we should all be looking at the scriptures that talk about what God's will is for leaders of governments, for leaders of nations. And we should be applying that to ourselves and to those that we put in places to represent us. And we live in it. We can change if we think the laws are unjust, we think the laws are wrong, we live in a country where we can fight to change those laws, and that's our legal right to do. And so that's been part of my work, is trying to change the laws so that they're laws that I can go to sleep at night knowing that I can submit to them and be honorable to that Romans 13 scripture, but more importantly, be honorable to my commitment to God and his law and his heart and his calling for my life. And so, and I mean, there's a lot. There's so many stories in scripture about people disobeying the governing authorities because it was in contradiction with God's law. Well, I think that separating families at the border the way that we are doing it, and to the people that we are doing it to, is in direct opposition of God's will and God's heart for his people. And so screw that. There's so much more biblical evidence that compels me to stand against this kind of policy than it does to say, well, that's the governing authority, so I better just submit. No, that's not how that verse was intended to be used. And Jeff Sessions needs to go back to Sunday school.
Awesome. So I told you we were going to keep you like 15 to 20 minutes. We're pushing 50 at this point.
Oh, well.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
I have learned so much, but I know you have a family, and you need to get back home, and this was so last minute. I don't want to keep you any longer, but I will tell you this: we're going to do this again, and give you a little more, time to prepare and come up with some more questions and stuff, because I'm sure this isn't an issue that's going to go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, it's not.
So,
or fortunately for the church, because we could use some discipleship on being more like Christ in conflict situations. So
yeah. So I do want to close with this, though. Our whole premise, Jay and I's whole thing about this, is creating conversation with people who are different than you, who may think differently and disagree, and how to have those civil conversations. So you're in the middle of this, and you do that on a regular basis, but what would your advice be to people on how do you start having conversations about immigration?
Yeah, well, I think if you kind of lean towards the more compassionate side, and being a little bit more immigrant friendly and wanting to welcome immigrants, and you want to engage in conversation with people that tend to be a little bit more, adverse to immigrants, to the idea of immigration and illegal immigration, I would say get your facts straight, know what you're talking about, because you can't go into a conversation, just with your bleeding heart. You need to actually have some knowledge, and I think that is kind of a problem with progressive Christians, is that we are not as strong on our theology. We're not as strong on our memorization of Scripture, and so that can kind of do us damage when we're entering into those conversations. But most importantly, like just kind of more generally, I think I am a part of an organization called the Global Immersion Project, and it's a peacemaking agency, and they talk a lot about listening longer than feels comfortable, and really seeking to learn or seeking to understand rather than to be understood. And so I think, when I've engaged in conversations with people face to face, it doesn't typically go this way on social media, but in person, it's really like, what is the pain or the fear that's beneath the rhetoric that you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really my goal when I'm engaging in conversation. Like, where's the fear coming from? Because it's usually based in fear of losing something, fear of being unsafe, fear of whatever it may be. And so if you can kind of understand that, then you can understand how to minister, how to be a witness to that person, how to love that person, if you're not, using kind of Christianese language, but how to love that person, how to walk with that person, how to encourage that person to think about it from a different perspective. I think going in as kind of a learner rather than trying to like spew like how much at someone, it goes a lot further than just trying to tell people how wrong they are and how stupid they are and how racist they are, because that usually is a non-starter for people. But if you can kind of ask enough questions to get to the root of what's dictating their feelings and their emotions and their thoughts and the way that they're processing information on a certain topic, then you might have a lot better chance of making progress and kind of getting to some common ground.
Awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, could not say it any better. So, Bethany, thank you so much for coming on, and we appreciate it.
More importantly, thank you so much for what you do.
Absolutely.
Too.
Oh, thank you.
Because
thank you.
You have obviously a labor of love in front of you. That just hearing in your voice, you obviously have a lot of passion for this, and I love the amount of not only passion but knowledge you bring to the table on this topic, and just keep doing what you're doing, because this is great work, and your clients are very fortunate to have you.
Oh, thank you. I needed to hear that today. It's been a rough day specifically, but a rough few weeks as well. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we will talk more soon. Get back to your family. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Again, thank you so much, Bethany.
You're welcome. Thank you, guys. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Dude.
That was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for going to college with her.
Yes. I had no idea the level of knowledge and how ingrained into this she was.
Yeah. No.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
I learned tons.
Well, and honestly, she as I alluded to earlier, is that this is such an emotional conversation, and a lot of it really kind of relies upon rhetoric, whatever side that you're on. But she showed the level of nuance and detail and legalese that are at the very core of this issue.
Right.
And how thoroughly complicated it really is.
Yeah.
And that usually doesn't make, the 24-hour news.
No.
It doesn't make for really snappy one-liners or anything like that.
Yeah. No, I haven't heard, 23-year wait list. Those guys, I would have never known that.
Yeah.
And it just puts the whole thing in perspective in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I'll share it on our Facebook page, but there's a really good infographic that I always like to share. Reason Magazine published a cartoon maze, basically, of navigating the immigration system, and it works like a flow chart. Do you have a particular skill? Yes or no? No. Go back to the start,
Right.
And it shows the process and the associated time frame with each of those steps. And it really does hit home the point that she says, is that there is not a strong incentive to follow the legal route.
Right.
And I think that's really at the core of this whole issue too, is that we dedicate and ultimately waste so many resources litigating this. As she mentioned, taking these people through trials to try and see if they qualify for refugee status or anything like that. The cost that it takes to jail and deport people, all of these public resources that we waste because we have a really bad system. We have really bad policies in place. And if we could figure out ways of streamlining it and creating a better pathway to citizenship, then a lot of the issues that she said people are afraid of go away.
Right.
And it's real. And what it really takes is the will to act, and it's just not there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I loved, and I won't remember the quote, but what she advocates for when she talked about those three things, like stricter, what was it? It was stricter immigration laws, but making it easier for get legal
She
citizenship.
said, if you can secure the border,
right?
You can make sure that you have the resources and infrastructure in place for that. But to really make it easier for people to gain citizenship.
Right. And for the people already here to do that.
Right. So. Yeah. Because, as she had referenced, there's 11 million people, 11 million undocumented people in this country. And that's really our best guess of what that is. Because undocumented people don't come out their door and say, hello, I'm undocumented. But to figure out what we do with these folks in terms of, do you deport 11 million people or do you try
Good
to
luck.
Yeah, exactly. And ultimately these folks are coming here not to drain our welfare systems or anything like that. I'm sure there's abuse on a lot of different levels, but there's abuse in all those situations.
Yeah, that goes across the board.
But ultimately, what people come here for is for a way of life that they can't get in their home country. Right. And a lot of it, I think, does have to do with economic opportunities, civil liberties.
Absolutely.
And
they're here for the same reasons we want to be here.
Yeah, and the same reasons all of our ancestors came here. It's we're so quick to think, well, I'm American.
Right.
It's like, yeah, but a couple generations ago you weren't.
Right.
And you should be able to afford the same opportunities that your ancestors had to these people as well.
Yep.
And I can go on and on about this topic, but I'm so glad that she was the one that went on because she's obviously the most knowledgeable of in the room.
Three of us. Yeah. So, I think, again, I don't think this topic will go away. I hope we can. It'd be fun to get her back on if something positive happens.
Yeah.
To hear a change and the excitement that would come with that. But this topic's not going away. I'm sure we'll revisit this in the future.
Mm-hmm.
But at almost an hour, it's time to wrap this one up, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
It's great to be back for sure. But close us out for tonight, Jay.
All right. You're listening to a Christian and an atheist walk into a bar where we solve the world's problems one adult beverage at a time. Cheers.
Find us on iTunes, rate and review, all those kind of things. Find us on Facebook, Instagram. Make sure you subscribe and let us know what you want to hear. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you next time.
Bye.